We will begin in just a few minutes. I would love it if attendees could just drop in the chat, and even though it's not something everyone can see, I would love to see what languages your English learner community members or students speak, and that will give us a little bit of idea of who's in the room and who we're serving in this community today. All right, I already see some answers for Spanish. Thank you for sharing that. Quiche, okay. Oh, hello from Iran. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And actually, I had a roommate with the same name as you, so it's great to meet you. Thank you, Jacqueline. I see Mixteco and Spanish. Okay, Leticia, you have a lot of languages in your community. And to everyone that just joined, feel free to drop in the chat the languages of the English learners that you are in touch with, that you're advocating for today. All right, lots of Spanish. It's great. And we're going to go ahead and get started in about 1 minute. African languages, yes. Diné. I'm guessing Diné is the indigenous language, is that right? Okay, perfect. All right. Joy, would you be okay with us getting started?
Yeah, we're all set.
All right, perfect. And thank you to everyone who's continuing to drop information in the chat for our, sorry, 1 second. Okay, so I wanted to clarify at the beginning of our webinar here that we will be presenting our information today in English, but if you would like to receive resources in Spanish, please send us a message with your email address and we will follow up after the webinar. I've also had my colleague Alyssa here drop in the chat in Spanish um, how to contact us, which is just direct message us with your email, and we'll make sure to send in-language resources to you afterwards. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruth M. Yoon, and I am the Education Policy and Program Coordinator here at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We're so grateful for all the work that you are doing with and for English learner students and their families, and for joining us today. We're here to talk about the long-held rights of English learner students and how community advocates can ensure these rights are protected and that students receive the resources they need to participate equally and meaningfully in public schools. So, a quick note about terminology. I wanted to point out that we are aware that the term English learner or EL is a deficit-based term because it focuses on what the student does not have, which is the English proficiency. But in the education field, it is more common to hear these students referred to as multilingual learners or emergent bilinguals, an asset-based perspective which is more accurate since these students likely are already proficient in one or more languages. For the purposes of this webinar and for clarity, we'll use the term English learner because this is how students learning English are referred to in federal laws and many policies. So today we'll be speaking with 4 different panelists. There will be a Q&A in the final 10 minutes of the webinar, so please feel free to submit questions and our team will flag them for me when it's time for the Q&A. So I am excited to welcome our first panelist, Lena Lanice, Policy Analyst for the K-12 Education Policy Project at Unidos US. Welcome.
Thank you, Ruth. Glad to be
So,
here.
yeah, I'm so glad you're here as well. Can you briefly tell me what's your interest or connection to the work of supporting English learners?
Sure. So I'll start at a personal level. I'm a former English learner myself. My family came to the US from Colombia when I was 5 years old. I know what it's like to not know the language and, to rely on those specialized services. To be able to thrive in school and ultimately be able to do the work that I do here at Unidos. So it's very fulfilling. Unidos and our senior director for education policy co-chairs the National English Learner Roundtable. And it's meaningful to be able to uplift English learners before policymakers and decision makers so that they're not an afterthought, but top of mind.
Thank you so much. And it's clear that the resources and support that you received helped you get to this place where you have the experience to advocate for students like yourself when you first came to the States. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm wondering, can you tell us more about the English learner population here? What's the demographic? Who are they?
That's a great question. So I'm going to start a big picture. Approximately 22% of children in the US speak a language other than English at home. And to put that into perspective, that's more than 1 in 5 children. But when we talk about English learners in the public school system, as you mentioned earlier, Ruth, there is a federal definition in our Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So in essence, right, it's a student who is between the age of 3 and 21. They're enrolled in an elementary or secondary school. They significantly speak a language other than English at home, and whose proficiency perhaps isn't quite enough so that they can succeed in an English medium in their school. By this definition, there are 5.3 million students who are English learners in our K-12 system. And again, I love putting things into perspective. So that is 1 in 10. That is a really large share of our public school student population. And this is true nationwide, but it's also true in at least 13 states. We're talking states like Alaska, Colorado, Hawaii, so a big range. And then, of course, we know that the highest percentages of English learners are in Texas, California, and New Mexico. Beyond the share and the number of English learners, I do think it's important to also highlight the growth of this population. Just in the last decade, where we have school year data for, we know that the number of English learners has increased by 15%. And also states that typically haven't had large English learner populations have also experienced that rapid growth in recent years. And that would be states like Maine, Tennessee. So it's important to keep that growth in mind. Other key facts, approximately 76% of English learners speak Spanish at home. And then the next most common languages are Arabic, Chinese, Vietnamese, Portuguese. And while schools don't collect immigration data, we are able to confidently say that a majority of English learners are born in the US. So yeah, those are a few facts to paint a picture of who our English learners are.
Yeah, and I think it's important that you mention that 5.3 million is 1/10 of our public school population. And depending on the state or the city, sometimes that concentration of English learners can be 20 to 25%, where I think in Texas, right, it's like 1 in 5 students is an English learner. So I'm wondering if you can share information on the academic outcomes of students who do or perhaps don't receive the necessary support for learning English. Do you have any personal experiences to share or just stories that you've heard from advocates or community members?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite questions to answer. And so we know that being categorized as an English learner, it should be temporary, right? What technically should happen in a well-functioning school system is for an English learner to be properly supported and then after a reasonable amount of time exit that program. Typically, research tells us that's between 5 to 6 years. That's how things should work. However, when our students don't receive those proper supports, they go on to become what we call long-term English learners, for short, LTELs. And so they are students who, after several years, don't exit the program. And unfortunately, there is vast research that shows us that LTELs have significantly lower levels of academic achievement, high school graduation rates, college attainment rates. But on the flip side, for students who do exit English learner programs, right, former English learners, they do just as well or actually go on to outperform those general education peers. So there's a lot that shows us this contrast and why it's so important that they are properly supported. One of those studies demonstrating this contrast was published late in 2024 by the University of Chicago. And so what they did was that they examined the outcomes of three cohorts of high school students. They followed their outcomes from ninth grade all the way till they ended 12th grade. And they found that the academic achievement for LTELs was substantially lower across, measures like cumulative GPA, SAT scores, college graduation rates, and their persistence in college, actually after graduating high school. Whereas former English learners across these same measures had higher achievement than the district average. So they outperformed their general education peers. And what I really, want to leave you with on this topic is how consequential it is whether an English learner receives the proper supports or not just for that individual student and for their own future and their own life, but for us in our communities, for our workforce, for our society, right? Because if we're talking about 1 in 10 of these students, I think we understand the importance for a future society that everyone really be supported and be able to thrive.
That's amazing. When I first came across that statistic of ELs who received the support they needed, actually outperforming their general ed classmates, I was very shocked and also very excited because it means there's hope. And it means that these students are completely capable and they just need access to the resources that they deserve and that federal law says they should have. And so, thank you so much, Lena. And I'm gonna transition over here to Niyati Shah. She's my colleague here at AJC. She is the director of litigation and also the person who helps spearhead our project on pulling together these resources that we are introducing to you today. So, Niyati, thanks for being here. Can you share what your connection is to or interest in the work of supporting English learners?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Look, I think several reasons. First of all, as Asian Americans, we are among that all population that Lena just outlined, in who are English learners across the country. And so when our communities are impacted, we certainly want to lean in on these issues. And then from a more personal angle, I was an ESL student. So both for both those reasons, this is both a professional and personal issue that's very important. And we know that, uh, you know, our communities aren't always as aware of what their rights are, and it's really important for us to just be aware of what we are entitled to so that we can thrive just like everybody else.
Thank you so much. And I want to talk about the resources that you work so hard to create alongside our partners. why were these resources created? I mean, what is the significance of having this particular Know Your Rights resource today?
Right. Well, first of all, Ruth, you're completely not including all your work in creating these resources. So a huge shout out to Ruth and so many other people who worked on this, some of whom are also on this call and or the webinar, and we'll get to them in short order, I'm sure. But as I said, part of this is also just creating information out there for our communities as well as for educators, because the Department of Education rescinded guidance that would enforce the English learner rights of students and their guardians. And while that doesn't change the law and the requirements, it became even more important that people are aware of what their rights are so that they can advocate for them, or that community members or trusted voices could help advocate for the families that need it. And so that is part of the impetus. And also, so that's one part of the resources we've created. We've also created another part for educators, so that they know what their obligations are to English language learner students. And so that is kind of what we created. And then we also understand that, look, I'm a lawyer, we can't help ourselves. We can be very dense sometimes. So we wanted it to be very um, to the point and simple. So we did create a basic Know Your Rights card that just kind of talks a little bit in big picture terms of what the rights are. It's been translated into, oh goodness, a bunch of languages, including English, obviously, but Arabic, Chinese, both simplified and traditional, Hmong, Korean, Spanish, Tagalog, Urdu, and Vietnamese. And it gets easily printed and has QR codes to get into the more detailed FAQs of what is, what is it at stake here, what their rights are, and give some more information.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And I wanted to clarify, like, what is this guidance that was rescinded and why is that important? If the law hasn't changed, right?
Yeah, the law hasn't changed. And it used to be that the Department of Education was the entity that families could call if their rights weren't met or whatever. And they were primarily enforcing these laws, federal laws that entitle these rights to them. And when they rescind that guidance, it becomes unclear as to what they're going to do, if anything, at this point. We just don't know yet. And when you take away something, try to sweep it under the rug doesn't mean it goes away. That's why we're here. This is why we're watching. This is why we're doing these things to like make sure that people don't um forget that people understand that their rights are still there. There are people who are here to help them and help them attain those rights if needed.
So it sounds to me like it's right now a very big messaging kind of statement to rescind the guidance. But again, I want to emphasize to our audience, the law hasn't changed. Our students still have rights, and we're here to advocate for them and ensure that they have what they need. So what are these rights? Since we've been talking about them and around them, tell me, what are these English learner rights?
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing before about the guidance. They actually didn't make a big stink about it. They almost did it very sneakily, like with a little header on top and maybe an email out to like a bunch of people. They didn't, kind of try to make a big ruckus about it. So that's part of the other thing I just want to tell folks that that's part of why we haven't seen the impact quite yet. But to go back to actually what the rights are, and I'm going to focus specifically on the rights of English learner students and their families. First of all, English language learner students, they have the right to participate equally and meaningfully in school, even if they don't speak or understand English. So what federal law requires schools to do then is to provide appropriate language assistance services to these students so that they can become proficient in speaking, listening, reading, and writing English, and then can participate in regular school programs. And this includes having instructors who are qualified to address the needs of English learner students. Um, and this has to be as part of what Lena said is earlier, is that this instruction has to happen in decent amount of time. It can't just be, ad nauseum or unlimited. And what schools have to do is meaningfully communicate with the guardians or family members who also may have limited English proficiency. And that means that you can provide either translated written materials or provide oral interpretation free of charge. This is kind of the big picture of what the federal law requires. I want to also remind folks to not forget that some states could have even more protections for English learners and their families. And so you shouldn't hesitate to look at to see what your state might do in addition to this baseline.
I'm so glad you shared that because I think the federal law is as you mentioned the baseline and so much more can be done for these students. And so much more can be advocated for, in my opinion, as a community member as well. So if they have questions about these resources, who can our audience contact?
Yeah, so a couple of points on that real quick. First of all, as I mentioned, the FAQs are a little bit denser, but feel free to share those. Either, as I mentioned, we have two sets, one for families and community members and trusted voices, and one for the educators, both. But also, if you need kind of weeding through that and understanding maybe what the specific issues are, if you notice on your KYR card, there's several organizations on it, including ours. Feel free to reach out to any of those organizations for additional information and help that we can provide. And also, of course, anybody else on this call, including Lena and Montserrat, who we're going to hear from soon.
Thank you so much, Niti. I'm going to transition us over to introduce Montserrat Caribe. She has so much experience to share with us, and I'm so grateful for her presence here. She is currently let me start with the formerly. She was formerly the Assistant Deputy Secretary and Director at the U.S. Department of Education at the Office of English Language Acquisition. And you may hear us refer to this particular office as OELA. She is now the Eastern Representative and Advocacy Chair for the National Association for Bilingual Education. And she brings a ton of experience in working with communities and schools to ensure that students have what they need. And so, Montserrat, welcome. I understand that you also would have identified as an English learner when you were a young child. I was wondering, could you share what supports or resources were most helpful for you in your journey to proficiency in English?
Yes, thank you, Ruth, and thank you so much for having this wonderful webinar with so many important resources and people who are, the people that are leading this work. So, yes, so one of the things that, as an English learner myself, who really my ESL teacher taught my sister and I English in a year. And when we talk about asset base, right? Our teacher really saw us as a group of children who had a lot of funds of knowledge and assets. And she really elicited that and helped with the many strategies that when I was a young child, I didn't know, right? Until I went to college and took all the classes that what was she was doing, right? And these are like the very basic strategies that all language teachers have in their toolbox and that they're able to utilize. And so one of the big things was the fact that my ESL teacher had very good parent engagement. And so she really utilized that relationship with my mother to help us get the resources that we needed. The fact that we needed to know that, that we had rights, even though we were undocumented, right? And that there were resources in the school that were after school programs and just very basic things like that, which when I work with the Office of English Language Acquisition, we put together our EL Family Toolkit, which was an outstanding piece that I wish I would have had 33 years ago when I was an undocumented child. But this EL Family Toolkit has 6 chapters, is being uh, translated in different languages. It's available for every parent and family. And it also comes with one-pager toolkits that talk about different things like, okay, how do you access different programs? What do you need to do when you have different special education needs, things like that, that are very easy to understand. But for parents, is giving them that knowledge that they can have so they can advocate for their children better.
Awesome. I know we've talked with Niti about the rights that English learners and family members have under the law, but from conversations with community members, I find that in practice there are a lot of major gaps in terms of staffing or learning materials and resources for these students. Um, I'm wondering if you could share a couple examples, like concrete examples of these gaps to help our audience understand like the day-to-day impact that these students are experiencing, um, and what they can do to help English learners close these gaps.
Yes. So, of course, there are many, and I will just mention and then go into detail in some of them. So, I think it's really important that we have a strong bilingual and ESL programs. Number two, we need to build parent and family leadership programs within our schools. Number three is really protect the access to rigorous instruction, because I think that's essential for our students to have that. The fourth one would be really supporting teacher workforce pipeline programs, which are essential. And then the fifth one would be really shifting the narrative, right? As Lina was saying at the beginning, this deficit mentality, it's really not helping our kids, but rather what we did with the Department of Education under the Biden administration is really seeing our students with an asset-based lens. But in terms of something that for me it's really important that we were able to do a lot of great work was with the support of the teacher workforce pipelines. Some of the national professional development grants that we had with the Office of English Language Acquisition was really helping different states, different communities to really have grow your own pathways for bilingual and ESL teachers. Of course, right now, as you know, with the president that we have and this administration, that is it's borderline, because a lot of the grants that used to get this money to really focus on grow your own programs at the federal level, a lot of those grants have been eliminated. So that's a big worry. But I think, we really need to advocate for tuition assistance and stipends for bilingual certification for bilingual teachers. And I think that that's something that we're seeing at the state level mainly, in different areas. So, for instance, Illinois, right? They passed a bill that would expand dual language programs, and they are being very thoughtful on how they're doing that. So we really need to kind of learn from one state to another. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, but rather sharing information from different states and highlighting. And that's something that we have been doing with the with NABE, that it's very helpful. I think the other thing that I would like to emphasize is how do we protect the access to grade level rigorous instruction for our students, right? We see that there is sometimes many of our students are overrepresented in remedial classes. And so also we see that they're underrepresented in gifted and talented AP dual credit programs. And sometimes, many times, they're also English learners are excluded from advanced coursework due to their language status, right? So I think we have an opportunity to really organize and to really advocate for our students and push our districts to kind of disaggregate this data, and by publicly reporting what is happening, what are the patterns that we're seeing, and then being very proactive in making sure that we're working in collaboration with universities, with community colleges, with professors in bringing best practices and professional development to the community. So I would say that those two are very essential, and especially right now, right, when we have our executive order from the president that says that English is the national language, right? So we're seeing these push and pull from different states. We know that the states that have been doing great work, they will keep doing that work, right? But there's a lot of uncertainty with those states that are not necessarily being helpful and providing the resources that our English learners need.
Thank you so much. And for our audience who may be interested in looking at that toolkit that she mentioned, we dropped it in the chat a little bit earlier, and we'll drop it in the chat again. And for those who are concerned, because there's a lot of links, we will follow up by email with the list of resources that were brought up by our panelists today. And thank you for bringing up the parent engagement part, because a lot of times the conversation is just about the student, but we know that the student has caregivers and other grown-ups in their life working beside them to help them succeed in their education. And so I just recommend from a parent perspective, because I'm a parent, that if you know of English learner families in your community, it's a good time to start a conversation to just ask, hey, do you feel like your child's getting what they need? What do you feel like you want different? Sometimes they just haven't had anyone ask them what they need. And if you start that one conversation, that can be enough to advocate for one extra thing in class or a culturally sustaining or responsive, environment for their student, or just helping that parent get access to in-language resources so that they can be fully involved in their child's journey through the public school system. So thank you so much, Montserrat. I hope you will continue being in our community so we can continue advocating and creating wonderful resources for our families and students.
No, my pleasure, Ruth. And I would just say that we really need to be unapologetic and really advocate for our students, right? And empower our parents to really know the information that they need so they can advocate. And I love that, the fact that Lina said that we need to reemphasize that these 5.3 million English learners, 80% of them are US citizens. So these are children who are part of our community, and we need to invest in them and empower our parents to be unapologetic and advocate for them. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Right now, I'd like to bring in our final panelist, Michael Pilera, who serves as the senior. No, wait, I'm saying your previous title. Okay. There's a lot of titles. Um, he was formerly the senior civil rights attorney at the Department of Education and is right now the director of Educational Opportunities Project at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. All that to say, he was also extremely, I lost my words. He was a major contributor in helping us get this resource out to you all. So thank you so much, Michael. And let's talk about what your connection is and your personal interest in the work of supporting English learners today.
Thank you, Ruth, and good afternoon, everyone. And I appreciate being on this discussion with such wonderful people. As you said, I've been an education civil rights lawyer for more than a decade. At Lawyers Committee, my focus is entirely on ensuring students receive equal educational opportunities. And when I served at the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, I investigated and resolved complaints of discrimination and drafted policy and resources focused on the rights of students who are English learners. And in every capacity, it has been abundantly clear how important both legal protections and sufficient resources are for students who are English learners.
Absolutely, and thank you. So can you tell me what is the history behind the protections for students who are English learners? Because I'm under the impression that English learner rights have been around for some time, but it seems to be like an urgent topic today. So what is the history behind this?
Yeah, a good starting point for discussion here is 1970. when the former U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which is the predecessor to what is now the U.S. Department of Education, issued a memo which was very clear about the rights of students who are English learners. Essentially, that memo clarified specifically that under landmark civil rights legislation, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, that act requires schools to provide equal educational opportunity to students who are English learners and provide guardians with limited English proficiency notification of school activities. And then following that in 1974, in Laos, the US Supreme Court confirmed that understanding of Title VI, confirming essentially what the memo said. And in that case, very importantly, the court stated there's no equality of treatment merely by providing students with the same facilities, textbooks, teachers, and curriculum for students who do not understand English are effectively foreclosed from any meaningful education. And then that same year, following the Supreme Court's ruling, the Equal Educational Opportunity Act of 1974, another essential civil rights law, was signed into law. Among other things, that law, the EEOA, specifically requires states and schools to take appropriate action to overcome language barriers that impede equal participation by students in a school's instructional programs. So for more than 50 years after that, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice confirmed the rights of students who are English learners again and again through numerous Dear Colleague letters, fact sheets, and other resources. And both agencies enforced the law through investigations and resolutions that ensured students who are English learners had full access to their rights.
Super important history to know. And also, I appreciate how in the law it says that students must be able to participate not only equally but meaningfully. And so it's not just about having the same classroom building or science lab supplies, but for language access to truly be made available for students to participate meaningfully. It translates to a lot of different resources that are necessary to ensure that they get what they need at school. So what are the challenges facing students today? How have things changed over the past year?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. So I want to be very clear to start out here. It's already been said, it's worth saying again. I might say it 2 or 3 more times before we're done, but the law has not changed at all. The rights students and guardians are entitled to have not changed. Both 5 decades ago and today, federal civil rights law requires schools to provide appropriate language assistance services to students who are English learners that enable them to become proficient in English and participate, as you said, equally and meaningfully in the standard instructional program of a school. Also, 5 decades ago through today, federal civil rights law requires schools to ensure meaningful communication with parents and guardians who have limited English proficiency in a language that they can understand. For example, schools should provide accurate written translations or interpretation to guardians. The Department of Education, as it's been said, has walked away from that obligation to protect the rights of students who are English learners, essentially announcing that it's not in line with their policy. That is for sure a distressing development, especially where we find ourselves in 2026 with so many children facing increasing hostility at school or unable to access school at all due to other actions of the federal government. But the law hasn't changed. Students continue to have rights for meaningful participation in education, and guardians continue to have rights to meaningful communication.
Okay, I hope the audience heard it loud and clear. The law hasn't changed. Students and family members or caregivers still have rights. Um, and do you have advice for our audience today for students, their families, for allies?
Well, as I promised, I'm going to say it a couple more times. I'm going to say it one more time. Federal law continues to guarantee the rights for students who are English learners and guardians with limited English proficiency. So advocate for your rights and for the rights of those in your community. In many circumstances, advocating can lead to solutions. And in a time when the federal government is not fulfilling its obligations to enforce civil rights laws, there may be other places to turn. Civil rights organizations, lawyers, legal aid organizations, and state government agencies. Over the past year, several states have worked to strengthen the enforcement of state law protections for students who are English learners. Where that is true, you can raise concerns of discrimination with your state. And where it is not, we should all advocate for our states to step up and meet the needs of students. Just as a couple examples, the New Jersey Attorney General's Office recently released detailed guidance on New Jersey state anti-discrimination protections and included specific examples of prohibited discrimination regarding students who are English learners. And in Maryland, a law was recently introduced to strengthen state legal protections for students, including students who are English learners. And there are many other examples in other states.
Thank you so much. I'm going to transition us now to our Q&A. Our team here has been making sure to check the chat and filter through things. We won't be able to address all the questions today, but we hope that you'll continue to engage with us because we are still in the process of creating more resources for you all in regards to English learner rights. So if I could start with Montserrat for the first question. I'd like to know if there are any states with particularly strong state statutes, this kind of like goes with what Michael was talking about, that protect the rights of English learners, so that if things are not being enforced at the federal level, there are still backstops at the state level.
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So yeah, I feel like Minnesota has been really one of the leaders. They have the Education for English Learners Act. And this statute includes a very comprehensive definition of English learner, and it requires structured EL programs to be offered by public schools. And so the state set like a definition of the program requirements explicitly in statute, which helps anchor accountability and consistency, which is really important. Also, the state education rules also they establish the developmental standards for English language development and teacher licensure requirements related to EL instruction. One that I also like a lot is how Connecticut did a multilingual learner Bill of Rights. And this was enacted by the Parent Bill of Rights for multilingual learners and English learners. And what I love about this is that this provides explicit statutory rights, which include like the right to attend public schools regardless of immigration status, right? Without the need for documentation such as the Social Security. The right for English learner students to receive translation and interpretation services during key interactions with educators and administrators. Also, the right for parents and guardians to receive written notices and information about their children's EL programs and their preferred language. Now, I think when you have states actually putting that in code, it's really important, right? Because we know that, yes, granted, the EL, the Dear Colleague letter, it's no longer official, as they say, right? We know that states, like Michael was saying, they still have this obligation to ensure that families are treated properly. And the fact that now it's coded in state law, I feel like it really makes it stronger. And so imagine if every state would be able to do that, it would be very helpful. Now, again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Connecticut has done this in this very special way. There are ways for other states to do that as well. I think one other one that I would say is Massachusetts. Massachusetts has dedicated their state statute that governs English language education in public schools. So under this law, it says that all students who are not yet proficient in English, they must be taught in English through a shelter English immersion program or another approved instructional model that meets both the state and the federal requirements. So, again, like for me, I feel like states like Massachusetts, Connecticut, Minneapolis, New York, those are just some of the states that we should really look and learn more about.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Liz, for dropping the link to the Parents' Bill of Rights. So AJC team, please save that link so we can also share it in our follow-up email. Um, I want to ask Michael in, well, okay, we've received a couple of really important questions about students with disabilities who are also identified as English learners. And so I wanted to ask you today, what is the impact of these rights and or the lack of the enforcement of these rights on English learners who have disabilities? What can we do to make sure that they are also supported?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this gives me another chance to reiterate the law hasn't changed, right? So when we're talking about students with English learners, just like any other student, they're students of English learners who also have a disability. The clear fact here is that there are multiple federal civil rights laws which protect students with disabilities, as well as multiple laws that protect students who are English learners. All of those laws apply to students who are English learners who also have disabilities, and school districts have to meet the obligations under all of those federal laws, which include, as I discussed, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, the EEOA, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, and Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So to be abundantly clear, all of those legal obligations have to be met. Students have to be provided the services they need, both for their disability and as an English learner. And in past times, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights put out guidance specifically focused on this intersection to try to provide assistance for school communities in sort of understanding this. I believe that guidance is still up on the Department of Education's website, and perhaps you could drop a link in the chat, but that guidance is particularly helpful.
Thank you so much for answering that question. What I was going to say is, in a time when the administration and or we're not getting the federal support that we need for English learners and students with disabilities, I want to emphasize that even if there's this concern over, well, funding's not secure or we're uncertain about the money that we can get to help our students, community advocates can go to the school board and advocate for allocations. And so, if you look at where the budget is and how things are spent, you will discover that actually there's a lot of money. It just might not be going to where we think it needs to go. And so, a community advocate can get this conversation started. So I know we're a little bit short on time, and so I want to make sure Niati also gets a chance to address one of these questions here. Um, how can we advocate appropriately and present action steps to the current administration regarding lack of supports for bilingual students while making sure their individual needs are met?
I mean, I think this is going to largely repeat what several of my fellow panelists and hosts have said. Here is that, look, first of all, you are not alone. We have to understand that. So many of us in our extended families and communities are impacted by the need to have better language access, right? And to get that in our education, both as students as well as a student's guardian or caretaker or parent. And we know that when they get that, and goes to part of what we have to remember and remind people of, like when they get the instructions that they are entitled to, we see that their academic success is amazing, often better and outpacing their English proficient peers. The economic impact is incredible. They go on to college, access good paying jobs that contribute to our workforce and economy. And we know that dual language proficiency is a huge need in this global economy that we are living in, if you will, in an increasingly smaller world, right? And so if you are not directly impacted, be an ally and remember this. We know that if they don't get the education that they're entitled to, it increases social isolation and really the missed opportunities for the kind of cultural and linguistic exchange that really enriches all of us, right? And so what can we do? Be an ally. Give this resource and the many, many resources that you're going to get after this webinar to those who need it and, help them advocate for their rights. Because as Michael said, the law has not changed, but the baseline has not changed. Could your state do more? And if so, advocate for those. I know we just listed a bunch of states that have taken some steps to do more, and we can, your state can follow the suit. And that's in your state, but also hold the federal government accountable. Ensure that your elected officials are representing your needs. So if you think you're in an unfriendly state, definitely reach out to one of our organizations. We'll be happy to kind of talk through what might be the best strategy. But otherwise, remember that your rights are here. You're not alone. You're one of many. And in these days, it's very easy to want to hide in the shadows, but you don't need to.
Thank you for encouraging our audience. I want to ask Lena a question. Could you talk about the impact on family members and caregivers when they receive the language resources they need? I know we've talked a lot about students who are obviously the center of our conversation, but again, on the parent engagement part, what what is the impact on their family members and caregivers?
Yeah, so I too am a fan about repeating the important things, right? And just to re-emphasize, something that hasn't changed is that schools must communicate the information to caregivers who don't speak English in a language they can understand. So anything about regarding a program, a service, an activity, that you would bring that you would bring to the attention of parents or caregivers who do speak English, you must also bring it to the attention of parents who don't. Matters like report cards, parent-teacher conferences, special education services, attendance policies. These are really important things in a child's education. And we know that parents want to be involved in their children's education. There is no question about that. So having the information and resources in a language they can understand really empowers them to better support their student academically and also make better informed decisions about their child's education. So, somebody asked about the interaction of, what if a student is an English learner, but also a student with a disability. So consider that parent, right? Of being able to have information about their child's individualized education plan in a language that they can understand helps them be a better advocate to ensure that that child is receiving both language access services, but also special education services. More broadly, right? Imagine a parent who is well informed about tutoring, about after school services or summer courses. A more informed parent, a more engaged parent leads to better academic outcomes, better well-being for that child, and even better health outcomes for a child when their parent can actively engage in that child's education.
Absolutely. And I also want to emphasize that when materials come home in language, it also is a signal to the parent that they are welcome and they are included. And so it's such a powerful message to them just having even school rules in their language. We are quickly running out of time, but we got this amazing question from an attendee here who wants to know, let me see here. I just lost it. Where is it? It's about COVID. Okay. Um, do you have insights, Montserrat, on how best to support and advocate for ELs who have been impacted by increase of distance hybrid virtual learning during and after COVID? So I think we're talking about learning loss concerns.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, I think, the pandemic really emphasized the need of the importance of having our communities having really rebuilding like language rich classrooms where we can also advocate for better address digital and access gaps, which right now it's something that we need to really advocate for still, even after COVID, having limited broad access in certain communities. But I have led my for the past 25 years, my work with three words: identify, educate, and mobilize. You identify the issue, you educate, bring stakeholders to the table, have courageous conversations, build coalitions, and then mobilize, whether it is mobilizing by having parents testifying at the Capitol, or parents talking with school board members, parents talking with administrators to make sure that the students get the needs that they have the most, right? So I think with COVID and all the things that happened during that time, I think we really also need to prioritize the social, emotional, and the mental health supports that we have in our communities, right? And what we can do by that is by demanding to hire bilingual educators, counselors, social workers, training teachers in trauma informed practices, because the fact of the matter is that we still have families who lost some of their family members, and so we really need to make sure that we are taking care of the students' mental health, but also the educators, because they also suffer a lot. So we really, by doing that, we can also really strengthen family partnerships. And again, like the EL family toolkit that I talked about, it's wonderful because it really has like the information in four different languages in one page tip sheets that you can literally download, share with the community, and advocate for the community in bigger ways. But yeah, those are kind of like the things that come to my mind, but I appreciate that question.
Yeah, super important because our students are, regardless of language proficiency, are still experiencing learning loss because of the pandemic. So right before we close out, I wanted to share this side note, which is that in Savannah, Georgia, there was discrimination against students who were Spanish speakers, and the community organized together, and they were able to secure $1 million of funding to fix this problem in their school district. So I just want to say that it was a lot of hard work on the part of the community members and the organizers, but they were able to achieve it. And so there are some success stories out there, and parents really have so much power. And so, as we close up, I want to say thank you for being here. We are actually going to host another webinar, same place, same time, next week, Thursday, for educators and stakeholders, sorry, educators and school administrators. And so that will be tailored for that audience. So if you want to share that with your community, educators and school administrators, please do it. We're going to be here 4 p.m. next Thursday, and an email will be going out to you all after the webinar. Thank you so much.